can't hear me, raise your hand.
I'm just having
Can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
All right.
It doesn't have anything I just don't want to haul it around.
I'm going to introduce myself. Jeffery Smith. Any questions? I'm going to talk to you about GMOs. Now, how many people have heard me speak about GMOs? Raise your hand. All right. So you've already heard the standard lecture, which is great because this is the non-standard lecture. How many people have never heard me speak or read anything that I've written about GMOs? Raise your hand. All right. Is this a little bit, it's a bit distorted. I'm going to reduce it. Is this better now? All right. So all right. I'm going to tell you some information that's fairly new. So I won't threaten to repeat myself too much for people who've seen the talks. Does anyone not know what a GMO is? All right. Okay. I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that so I can introduce it. Some religious people think that GMO means God move over. Some activists think it means get Monsanto out. Farmers think it means grow more organic. But others think it's genetically mutated organisms or genetically modified organisms. And that's where they take genes from one species and force it into the DNA of other species. They could normally never contain those genes. This is still fuzzy. I'm going to lower it down. For AV, you may want to, I'm going to lower this down, but I feel that there's a little bit of feedback.
You sound fine.
All right. So you can take genes from different species, and they do. They've taken spider genes and put it into goats, and they can milk the goat to get spider-web protein to make bulletproof vests. You can't make this stuff up. It's absolutely crazy. You can, and if you think about it, if you can mix and match between kingdoms, what can't you do? You can make rice that tastes like pizza that has a full protein complement that grows in one day and resists everything. This is the excitement that the adolescent scientific brain thinks about in the context of GMOs, that the world is our kingdom. What can we create? There's no boundaries. But what it does is it creates a sense of arrogance that we can do it better than the billions of years of evolution. And the most arrogant statement that my friend had ever heard in his life was at a biotech conference in 1999, where Arthur Anderson, Monsanto's attorney, Monsanto's consultants, asked their client executives to describe their ideal future in 15 to 20 years. They described a world in which 100% of all commercial seeds were genetically engineered and patented. And Anderson worked backwards from that goal to create a strategy and tactics to achieve it. And this is their plan, to replace nature. So that's the GMO. Now, the GMOs that are being consumed now are primarily in two categories: the poison drinkers and the poison producers. The poison drinkers are called herbicide tolerant. You can spray Roundup-ready crops with Roundup herbicide. It won't kill Roundup-ready crops, just all the other plant biodiversity. Most of the crops that are genetically engineered are Roundup ready. The other category is the pesticide producers. These are corn and cotton plants engineered to produce a toxin that's designed to break open the stomach of insects and kill them. And the toxin is put into the food supply. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the BT, because some of the information about BT is completely new. I'm going to talk about it in the context of an interview I did this year with Dr. Don Huber. Dr. Huber's been in the news about GMOs because he's discovered a new organism that's new to science that may be causing reproductive failures all around the United States with livestock. And I'll get into that. But he was pulled into the GMO research because he's one of the leading researchers in the world on Roundup. And if you're researching Roundup, you're researching Roundup ready. And so he became aware of all the animal research that's going on, visited some places that are doing research, and started to describe the changes in the livestock and the lab animals that have been fed fed genetically modified crops. And he gave a talk in Germany recently, and a doctor approached him afterwards and asked for more information. So Dom got very specific. And then the medical doctor said to Dom, this is what we're seeing in autistic children. Exactly. And that he had studied autism his entire career. So I want to start this discussion with respect to autism. We're going to go into it and it gets a little heavy, but I want to do a pretest first. I want to ask you to rate yourself from 1 to 100 how vigilant you have been at avoiding GMOs. Right? Now, most people at a Health Freedom Conference don't want to admit that they're eating GMOs or they don't particularly pay attention. But most people don't pay attention. On a scale of 1 to 100, most Americans are minus 19. They don't even know what a GMO is, and they don't know they've ever eaten one. Most Americans. So most people in this audience should probably be the lowest category of vigilance to avoid GMOs. That's 1 to 20. So let's see a show of hands. How many place themselves from 1 to 20? Raise your hands. Raise it high. No one's going to admit it? All right, I'll make it harder. Let's make it harder first. In restaurants. How vigilant are you at avoiding GMOs in restaurants? How many people are low vigilance? 1 to 20, raise your hand. 20 to 40? 40 to 60? 60 to 80? 80 to 100. Now, in grocery stores. 1 to 20? Now the hands go. 20 to 40? 40 to 60? 60 to 80? 80 to 100. 100 people hate raising their hand. How many people are farmers? Thank you, farmers. All right. How many are gardeners? Great. How many eat? Almost everyone. All right. So that's the pretest. We're going to ask you how vigilant you're going to be avoiding GMOs next week in about 20 minutes. When you hear some of the evidence. I'd like to ask you how active you've been in educating people about GMOs. Most people are low active. It's going to be 1 to 20. How many are 1 to 20? Raise your hand. 20 to 40? 40 to 60, 60 to 80, 80 to 100. All right, so most for 1 to 20, followed quickly by 20 to 40. In the avoid category, there's a lot, maybe 100 on press. But still, 1 to 20 and 20 to 40 were higher in the combined count. So let's talk about autism and GMOs. What is it about these animals? I'm still giving a buzz. I'll try to do it here. Huh?
You're fine out
This
here.
one does not. Yeah, this one's there. Okay. Is this not enough? All right. So what was first happening was the behavior of the animals changed. He said he visited a laboratory where they were doing studies on rats. And the rats that were fed the genetically modified corn that was engineered to produce the BT toxin were very antisocial and aggressive. And they wouldn't play like rats. But those that were on the non-GM corn, you could pick them up and tap them, they were just like pets. He said pigs on the GM corn were aggressive, cannibalistic, biting each other, antisocial, agitated. On the non-GM corn, happy pigs. I talked to a farmer last month who has some clients. He said the pig was in the nursery of one of his clients. The behavior completely changed when they switched to non-GM corn as well. There's a study at the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow when they found that rats that were fed genetically modified soy were more aggressive and cannibalistic, and they would bite and fight as opposed to those that ate non-GM soy. A student doing an undergraduate study on mice in Holland found that when he went to weigh the mice that were on non-GM diets, no problem. He put them in a laundry basket, took them out, weighed them, fine. When he took those that were eating the GM soy and corn, they were running around trying to jump up, really scared, completely agitated. And the only difference in these were one was eating genetically engineered, and one was eating non-genetically engineered in all cases. So something was different about the behavior. Something was also different in the gut physiology. autistic kids have digestive problems. And above the digestive problems is gut permeability. I've talked to farmers who butcher animals, and they say that when they butcher the GM-fed animals, the organs are discolored and there's a large, heavy stench, which could be the other problem, which is gut bacteria changes, which we'll get to. But also when they pull out the intestines, they're thin and tear. They're really messed up. You can see them visually. So in the United States, they no longer use intestines for sausage casings from the US. They import them from New Zealand. When you look at the pictures of the guts of rats that genetically modified potatoes in Europe as an experiment, you see proliferative cell growth and a changed gut architecture. The animal's intestines are often heavier or a different shape with GMOs, either on a microscopic level or just physically the heaviness with the laboratory animals. They see a lot of these problems in the digestive capacity. And then they see changes in the gut bacteria. I talked to 2 veterinarians. They said, since GMOs were introduced, he's seen a lot of changes, both in inflammation in the intestines, but also changes in the bacterial balance since GMOs were introduced. So they have to spend a lot of time preparing that. And I talked to people who treat autistic kids with dietary interventions, and they talk about gut permeability and gut bacteria imbalance. Same kind of thing. Now, gut permeability is very significant. If you have holes in your intestines, then undigested food gets in. Bigger building blocks that are supposed to get into the blood get there. And according to many medical doctors and scientists, it can trigger allergic reactions, autoimmune disease, inflammation, and some people link it to autism. Now, if you remember earlier in the talk, I was discussing Bt toxin. Can you remember the mode of action of Bt toxin? Anyone? How does it kill the insect? Breaks open the stomach of the insects and kills them. It breaks open the stomach of insects and kills them. It creates what they call micropores or pores, and allows, somehow it kills them. They think that that's the reason. They know it does that, and they think that's the reason it kills them. But it hasn't been added to the intestine, just to say it's absolute proof. But they assure us that the Bt toxin is completely harmless to human beings. All right? They say this. They say that there are 3 reasons why they can justify putting the Bt toxin right into the food supply. So Bt toxin comes from Bt bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis. Bt. It's soil bacteria. You gather the bacteria from the soil, you put it in a spray, and even organic farmers are allowed to spray this natural pesticide which kills insects. And then it gets biodegraded, washed off in the rain, and it's considered fairly harmless because of its biodegradable capacity. And one of the assumptions that are put out there by the EPA, which registers this corn as a pesticide, registers the plant as a pesticide, is that it has a history of safe use in the food supply. So it should be safe. It has a history of safe use in farming. Well, if you look at the peer-reviewed published studies, when they sprayed Bt toxin for gypsy moth infestation in the Pacific Northwest, about 500 people had allergic or flu-like symptoms. Some had to go to the hospital. Farm workers mixing the Bt have accidents, they have to go to the hospital. A farm worker study showed the immune system responses to Bt. The EPA's own scientific advisors suggest that it's probably an antigen or an allergen and should be studied. But the EPA ignored it. So, assumption 1, false. Assumption 2, it's destroyed during digestion in mammals or humans. A study done and published last year in Canada found that Bt toxin was found in 93% of the blood of pregnant women. So 93% of the pregnant women tested had Bt toxin circulating in their blood. And so did 80% of their unborn fetuses. If it gets into the blood, it survives digestion. But they didn't have to wait to the human study last year. They could have looked at mice studies, showing them the mice that were fed the Bt toxin, it survived digestion, and countered the third assumption. The third assumption is it has no interaction with humans or mammals. But when it was fed to mice, it caused tissue damage in the intestines and immune responses. And last week, a study from the Journal of Applied Toxicology did something so obvious. They took the Bt toxin out of the corn and exposed it to human cells, and what did it do? It broke open the holes in the cell, causing leaky cells. So it does affect humans, it does survive digestion, it gets into our blood, it gets into our babies, and it might be causing gut permeability. I'm doing a film where I interview several doctors about their experience treating people who may be harmed by GMO. And two doctors who are in this conference today describe how they believe that Bt toxin may be causing gut permeability, leading to a wide spectrum of diseases. Now, in the Canadian study, where they found it in 93% of pregnant women, they wanted to figure out how come the women are getting such high-frequency exposure to Bt. Because Bt is not going to last in the blood very long. And if it was in 93% of the women, they must be eating Bt all the time. And Bt is only, this particular Bt is specifically from Monsanto's corn. So are they eating corn every day? Probably not. So they figured that maybe, and they put this in the paper, maybe the Bt toxin that's in their blood comes from eating the milk and meat from animals that were fed Bt corn. Now, I have an alternate explanation. It might be true. There's been one human feeding study conducted and published on GMOs, which might shock some of you. It's meant to millions of people, but there was one study, one deal. But what they found was that before the meal was served, in 3 of the 7 human volunteers, inside the DNA of the bacteria living inside their intestines was the gene inserted into soybeans to make the soybeans round and red. And the bacteria was unkillable with Roundup. So the bacteria was round and red, which suggests that the gene was now functioning inside the gut bacteria. Now, there's a lot of medical implications for that. The protein produced by that gene has properties of a dust-mite allergen, so if you're allergic to dust, you might be allergic to that protein, which is produced perhaps continuously inside your digestive tract, which is not good news. But they stopped the study. They didn't do any follow-up. Now, what if they studied to see if the Bt toxin transfers from corn chips? Not the toxin, but the gene that produces the toxin. What if the gene that produces the Bt toxin that breaks open the stomach of insects and kills them, that breaks open holes in human cells, what if that transfers into the DNA of our gut bacteria, turning it into living pesticide factories? Maybe that is a better explanation for why 93% of the pregnant women in Canada and 80% of their unborn fetuses have the Bt toxin in their blood. Because it's being produced from inside them. Now, we don't know if it's true, and there are many reasons scientifically why that transfer is probably taking place. And why we may have colonized the gut bacteria in North America. And when I say this to medical doctors, and I speak at medical conferences all over the world, those in the United States say this might explain the increase in gastrointestinal problems we're seeing in our practice. And it might explain the problems in the cell walls of the guts of the animals that are exhibiting the behavior like the autistic kids. But the gut bacteria is not only potentially colonized, we're eating bacteria, changing its balance. And Don Huber told me that there are certain gut bacteria in the stomachs of cows that control botulism. This is just one example of why gut bacteria is important. Certain gut bacteria controls the growth of botulism bacteria. And that controlling bacteria with tiny amounts of Roundup is destroyed. And botulism can take off, which may explain the outbreaks of botulism in the United States and Europe. The gut bacteria is not trivial. There are 10 times as many cells of gut bacteria in our bodies as there are cells in our bodies. It's involved in the immune system, in digestion, it produces vitamins. And we may be killing off large amounts with eating Roundup. Of course, the Roundup-ready gut bacteria will survive, so it has a survival advantage, so it may live long and prosper. And then we may have the colonization. We don't know what the Bt toxin does, but I talked to one scientist in India who was trying to figure out why thousands of sheep, buffalo, and goats died when grazing on Bt cotton plants after harvest. The livestock in India often graze on cotton plants after harvest without a problem. But when Bt cotton was introduced, thousands of sheep, goats, and buffalo died. I visited one town where they allowed their buffalo to graze for 8 years on cotton plants without a problem. 13 buffalo grazed for a single day on Bt cotton plants, and they all died within 4 days. I visited a location of a study done by a small nonprofit where 100% of the sheep raised on Bt cotton plants died within a month, and 100% of the control have no symptoms. So this top biologist, he's very top, in fact 25 of his close personal friends and former students have Nobel Prizes, he said they have found that the intestines in this sheep were shrunken. He said they're shrunken because they're not getting the food. He thinks the Bt toxin is killing off the bacteria in the rumen, which is the first compartment of digestion for these ruminant animals, which breaks down the cellulose. And if it's not breaking down the cellulose, the animals will starve to death. So when I went to this village where they had 13 buffalo that died, I talked to one of the people that participated in the autopsy. And he said after 3 or 4 days of dying, and the animal died, they opened it up, it still had undigested food in the rumen. I called up the scientist and I said, undigested food in the rumen? He said, see, I told you. So another example, we don't have rumen bacteria, so we don't know if Bt toxin is compromising that. But we don't know what it does. When you take an insect that Bt normally kills, and you remove all the gut bacteria of that insect, the Bt toxin doesn't work. So somehow it interacts with the gut bacteria, even in the insects. And we don't know if that means it interacts with our gut bacteria. Now, if it does, children are certainly most at risk, because their blood-brain barrier is not developed. Certainly not in the fetus, and not as infants. So if they're taking the toxin and it's getting through into the bloodstream, and it's getting to the brain, what's it doing? Maybe it's causing developmental disorders, behavioral changes. So these are really serious issues that are not being looked at. Now, I want to talk about some stories that I got recently. I told you about the guy whose pigs changed their behavior. Actually, the story is very interesting. He called up a person I just met at a farm conference, and he was very excited, was stammering, could hardly get the word out. It had been 11 days since he had switched his pigs to non-GM corn, and everything was different. The behavior, the health, everything. 3 days into the switch, he and his brother walked into the nursery, and they laughed as they joked and said, well, maybe the change is the non-GMO corn. But 11 days they were sure of it, because the pigs were exhibiting the same behavior and health, good health, that they had 14 years earlier before they switched to GM corn. In fact, this guy said it used to be that his brothers at the farm would kind of make fun of him or be jealous of him because he had the easiest job at the farm, because he was in charge of the nursery. He had thousands of pigs. But 14 years ago, that became one of the hardest jobs, because now the pigs were getting sick all the time, and their behavior changed. And they thought it was because of the rise of the factory farms in the area, and they're bringing in different pigs into the area, bringing different diseases. But 11 days into non-GM corn, and he realized it was the same conference, a person stood up and said a friend of his was raising miniature cattle, 3 feet high, 350 pounds. He didn't have any more non-GM corn. He switched to the GM corn. 90% of his herd died in 2 weeks. I talked to him about the sheep. He said, yeah, these small cattle like large sheep. Maybe the rumen thing doesn't work in the large cattle, but in the small cattle that has smaller rumen cavities, maybe that's the problem. He said they bloat it up, which leads me to think, yeah, bloating up, not digesting. Maybe it turns into gas. Maybe they're bloating up because of the fermentation. All these different signs. I asked the 5 farm conferences I spoke to this year so far, how many of you have seen evidence personally, or persons that you know have seen evidence personally, that animals are getting hurt from eating GMOs? And so many hands went up. And people talk about cats and dogs. And I interviewed veterinarians, like Michael Fox, one of the top veterinarians in the country, 40 books, syndicated column that goes to 12 million homes. He says when GMOs are introduced, a whole host of diseases increase in the cats and dogs, including allergies and itching. When he tells his writers, doesn't write into him with the problems, he says, switch to organic, the itching goes away. I've been visiting many doctors that prescribe non-GMO diets, and they describe the health dangers, the health problems that get better with non-GMO diets. And they're prescribing non-GMO diets, and they're using the non-GMO shopping guide that we have outside for everyone. But when you talk to the humans, as opposed to talking to the animals, it's a lot more interesting because they actually talk back. But it's hard to pinpoint that GMOs are the cause because they're also switching to organic to avoid the GMOs, they're switching out to less processed foods to avoid the GMOs. So you don't know what cofactors involved. But when you take animals, like a farmer told me in Ohio, and switched his pigs to non-GM corn, and the red bloodshot eyes go away for the first time, and the litter size increases, and the stillborn rate goes down, and the death rate goes down. And he says, the pigs are happy. And then I heard a veterinarian 2 months ago in Iowa say, the cows are happy. He switched a client's 5,000 head feeding lot operation. Within 2 days, they were eating more. 2 days, and it wasn't even completely non-GMO. And they had less pneumonia and other problems, less death rate. And he said they're happier. They're not agitated and scared and skittish. So something is happening with the health and behavior. And that's just maybe related to the BT. We don't know. The Roundup pulls out the nutrients from the plants. It allows the animals to eat the nutrient-deficient plants. They become nutrient-deficient. There's a universal deficiency in certain nutrients in our livestock. They become diseased and disordered. We eat the sick animals. We eat the nutrient-deficient plants. And we eat the more Roundup, which, of course, chelates, binds with the nutrients in our body, which makes the nutrients less available. So we're draining our own bodies through the plants, through the animals, and directly through the glyphosate of important nutrients. But glyphosate is now linked to birth defects and endocrine disruption, testosterone disruption, estrogen disruption, cancer, and the animals that have been fed GM soy, the rodents in the laboratories, they had changes in the young sperm cells, testicles changed from pink to blue. I'll let that one sink in. Changes in the uterus and ovaries, DNA function differently in the embryo offspring. Female rats fed genetically modified soy, more than half of their babies died within 2 weeks, compared to a 10% death rate among their controls. Hamsters fed GM soy for 3 generations. By the 3rd generation, most lost the ability to have babies. Some had hair growing in their mouths. They died 4 or 5 times the rate as well. Now, we don't know if it's the Roundup, we don't know if it's the genetically engineered soy, and we don't know if it's this new organism that Dr. Don Huber's team of scientists have discovered that's in high concentrations of the aborted fetal tissue of livestock that can't hold pregnancies or who are infertile. But it's in high concentrations of the Roundup-treated crops. And that's a whole other story, but I don't want to get into it, because what I want to do is end on a positive note. Because if you leave in the middle, as some people have, I think you might be very depressed. And I don't like to leave people depressed. But I do like to leave people with a different approach to their food. So I'm going to ask you in a moment to rate yourself from 1 to 100 how vigilant you'll be next week in avoiding GMOs. All right? Now, you might ask, if GMOs are so bad, how can they be approved by the FDA? Now, this particular conference may not ask that question, unless you happen to be wandering off the street. Let me just give you the short version. The FDA policy says we don't need to test GMOs at all. We don't even see a difference whatsoever. Monsanto, who told us that their PCBs, Agent Orange, and DDT were safe before they were taken off the market, they can tell us if their GMOs were safe. Who was in charge of that policy? Monsanto's former attorney, later Monsanto's vice president, now the U.S. Food Safety Czar at the FDA. Michael Taylor. Now, while he was at the FDA, he suppressed, and no one was made aware of, the actual memos that were circulating at the FDA, which became public from a lawsuit, and we now know that the entire policy was based on a lie. Not only were they aware that GMOs were different, the overwhelming consensus of the FDA scientists were that GMOs were dangerous, dangerously different. They could lead to allergens, toxins, and nutritional problems. It would be very hard for the companies to detect. They wanted, rigorous long-term studies, but were ignored by Michael Taylor, who's now in charge of the U.S. Food Safety. So the person who I think may be responsible for more food-related illnesses and death than anyone in human history is in charge of food safety. So you may ask the question, if GMOs are so bad, why do we see more problems? Are we seeing more problems? How many people were in the meeting today from 1 to 3? And you saw that list of all the problems that that pediatrician was showing. It's amazing. And I mentioned some of the statistics. Inflammatory bowel disease up 40% since GMOs, multiple chronic illnesses up 7% to 13% in the first 9 years. Food-related illnesses doubled. What's interesting is this. I have been talking about this since 1996. And then recently, a year or two ago, I started hearing people and their doctors saying how dramatic their improvement was and how quick their improvement was when they switched to non-GMO diets. But I wasn't sure if it was the GMO. Then I started hearing the farmers and veterinarians, and the only change was the GMO diet. Only change. Rate yourself from 1 to 100. How vigilant you'll be next week in avoiding GMO. How many intend to be low vigilant, 1 to 20? Raise your hand. 20 to 40. 40 to 60. 60 to 80. 80 to 100. All right, there's a guide outside to tell you, and I'll explain a little bit how to do it. You may have noticed a difference. Now, some of you probably wanted to raise your hand before 80 to 100, but when they saw the hand go up, they didn't want to be. No, so when most people were 80, nearly everyone was 80 to 100. I'm going to guess most people were 60 to 100. Because I've done this all over the country, that's the answer. Most people are 60 to 100. I have doctors groups. In 26 minutes, they switch from 0 to 20, 80 to 100. I did a group in Connecticut, 10 minutes, including the minority leader for the Senate. 10 minutes, he was converted. Now, the reason I do this is for a couple of reasons. One is to see how well I'm doing, but really to reinforce the decision, so you make a decision now, but also to enlighten about a strategy. How do we get rid of GMOs? Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of how a tipping point was created in Europe, but it was very quick. A gag order was lifted on a scientist who could speak about the dangers of GMOs. Over 700 articles were written within a month. 10 weeks later, the tipping point of consumer rejection was achieved. Unilever and Nestle said no more GMOs in our European brands, and so virtually did everyone else within a week. In the European brands, you may have heard that, in the European brands, the same companies, Kraft, Hershey's, Nestle, that sell GMOs to us, have removed GMOs in Europe. We started advertising the health dangers of bovine growth hormone linked to cancer, the genetically engineered drug injected into cows, formerly from Monsanto. It's already banned in Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Japan. It's now banned in Walmart's milk, Starbucks, Yoplait, that, and most American dairies because of education about the health danger. In both cases, a tipping point. Now, how do we create a tipping point of consumer rejection in the United States? Let's just think of what our target is. How many people? First of all, it's not a vote. Unlike the California ballot initiative, which I hope you'll be part of, in gathering signatures, and we're going to have a training course right here at 5 o'clock today, how to gather signatures. But there we need 50% plus one. You think the Kraft food marketing manager is going to wait for a 50% drop in market share to switch out to non-GMOs? Remember, if he switches to non-GMOs, he doesn't lose any customers. No one wakes up saying, I want my Getty goes to Roundup and BT. If he sees any drop in market share whatsoever that he can identify as caused by the resistance to GMOs growing in the United States, that's like an institutional sell signal. Get rid of GMOs. We saw what happened in Europe. It happened quickly. Secure the non-GMO food supply needed. Just a little drop in market share. How do we create a little drop in market share? You think about 5% of U.S. shoppers, 15 million Americans, 5.6 million households. That's easy. 5.6 million households. That's easy. There's 28 million Americans that buy organic on a regular basis. But like you at the beginning, we're not vigilant at avoiding genetically modified foods. So we have to figure out a strategy. How are we going to convince people to avoid genetically modified foods? And we figured it out. Tell them the truth. And does it work? You just saw it. So that's the aha. That's the main reason why I showed the before and after, because it really doesn't take very long. It just takes telling the truth, and it's easier if you tell receptive people. Now, Health Freedom Expo folks, you're totally receptive. I don't have to tell you that the FDA is not protecting us. You get that. But it's fun to know about Michael Taylor. It's more ammunition, right? Parents of young kids, totally receptive. Health-conscious shoppers in general. Religious folks that think GMO means God will over. Totally receptive. Sick people, receptive. In fact, most Americans are receptive. 53% say they would avoid eating GMOs if labeled. So I hate to say it, guys, but in this case, you're the majority. You may be enjoying the fact that you've been kind of weird your whole life, but in this case, wanting to avoid GMOs, you're actually mainstream. But 53% of the people want to avoid GMOs, and 9 out of 10 of those are lying, and we still get our 5%. So it should be very simple to create a tipping point. It's just a matter of getting the information out to those who are receptive. Now, we have been generating an upsurge of consumer awareness and concern about GMOs, identified and predicted by supermarket news, as seen in the fact that non-GMO labels are one of the fastest growing labels in America for the past 3 years, as seen by more than 100 events last year, rallies, a march on Washington, events all over the country. And this is now coalescing in a variety of actions. And one of the actions is labeling. And 19 different states have bills before their legislature. In some states, maybe they've died already, maybe they're about to be introduced. I was in Connecticut yesterday, where they actually have a labeling bill in the Environment Committee. And I gave a press conference on Friday, and I was bolstered on both sides by the most conservative Republican representatives and the most liberal Democrats, and they were both for labeling of GMOs in Connecticut. These we don't know if they're going to pass, because there's a few of those people, they're easy targets for the Monsanto lobbyists, like the one standing right in front of me during the whole time I was speaking. He was the only one dressed in a suit. In the audience, you can sort of tell right away who it was. So we don't know if we're going to be able to get past the influence peddling and lobbying and money of the Monsantos in the state legislatures. But I think we have a huge advantage in California with the ballot initiative process. Now, in the ballot initiative, if we pass the labeling bill, which is going to be on the ballot in November, assuming we get enough signatures, and we win, then if we pass this, then what do you think Kraft Food's going to do, knowing that 53% of Americans say they would avoid GMOs and label? They'd rather get rid of it rather than if they use it. Now, I think that when you have a political campaign, it increases the coverage, attention, and overall buzz. So, in my opinion, this is a perfect time to combine a campaign with messaging that means, yes, we should know if GMOs are labeled, and here's why we should avoid them even if they're not. And we combine the messaging so we win both at the ballot box and at the supermarket cash register. So we drive a tipping point in California so our victory is assured irrespective of where the vote goes. Because we only need 15 million Americans, and where better than California? Right? I mean, if you think about it, and I think about it, GMOs influence all living beings, not just human beings, all living beings. They self-perpetuate in a fluid gene pool, so they influence all future generations. The U.S. is the big bully on the block. If you look at WikiLeaks, you see that ambassadors from the U.S. are basically working for Monsanto, trying to get the GMOs in other countries. So is USAID and USDA. It's basically, it's rigged. So the U.S. government is pushing around the world. But consumers can deflate the status of GMOs in the country. And California can do it the most easily. And who in California is going to take the reins to get it done? You. The people who are aware enough to come to this conference. Not the junk food eating couch potato that hasn't yet realized that food relates to health. Not the person that believes Monsanto that GMOs are going to feed the world, because they actually work against that. It's basically those who are already conscious and informed, and have heard the 10 or 20 minutes to change their diet, and have taken the red pill, the Morpheus red pill where there's no going back. The matrix is gone. GMOs look different now. So you have an opportunity to put on your resume, as I said before, help them in genetic engineering food supply in 2012. And think about the effect of that action. It may be very simple, it's certainly very fun to help people get what they're looking for. 93% of Americans want GMOs labeled. In just this little action between now and November, you can change the course of events for this century and all future generations.
Oh, good deal.
Yes. We have an unbelievable opportunity. So you can see this as a burden, and certainly the GMOs are a burden. You can see this as an amazing opportunity to step up and do something that no one in other generations has had an opportunity to do. To protect nature. They wanted to replace nature. We want to protect nature. So you can do it for the plants, the animals, your gut bacteria, yourself, your great-great-grandchildren. And it's very simple. At 5 o'clock today, which is in 13 minutes, I will start the talk and hand it over to someone who will explain how to gather signatures. And until April, mid-April, that's the focus, signature gathering. After that, more fun begins. We will put people on tour, we will release videos, we will create ways that you can, I can't read that, what is that? Zero. All right, 0. Since I'm running the next event, I have a little more time. I'm going to take it too. So the fun begins. I'm going to be moving to California for part of the time. We're going to be putting people like Robin O'Brien on shore. The guy who's good name here, Kirk Escondido, he's a former Monsanto employee for physicians and realized what's going on in the company and got out. So we're going to be creating a whole series of events that you can participate in as an organizer, as an audience, as someone that promotes it. There's a lot of things we can do. If you have friends who can donate to this effort, who can be celebrities. How many people know someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows a celebrity? I'm in Southern California, I want to see more hands than that. All right? So I don't know many celebrities. Daryl Hannah, I know her, she's spoken here before last year. I would like to get some celebrities. In fact, I'm making a film, and I'd like to get a celebrity to narrate it. We want to create TV, well, TV commercials. We want to get celebrity endorsements. We want to get celebrity quotes. We want to get endorsements from medical organizations and religious groups. Remember, religious groups. Big, powerful, untapped source. So there's an opportunity to mobilize. Now, there's two types of messaging here. I want to be very clear. The messaging that's the easiest to get someone to shake their head with is, we deserve a choice. 9 out of 10 Americans want GMOs labeled, right? 50 countries require labeling, but not in the U.S. So we want labeling. This is just to give a choice. Even if you're pro-GM and you want your daily dose of Roundup and BT, you want to choose the GM, right? So whether you're for GM or not GM or against GM, you still want choice, right? So that's easy to get everyone to go like this, all right? Then you say, oh, by the way, there may be some reasons why you want to avoid GMOs. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine says all doctors should prescribe non-GMO diets because the animal feeding studies show reproductive failures, immune system problems, accelerated aging, organ damage, gastrointestinal problems, dysfunctional regulation of cholesterol and insulin, and they're for labeling. Oh, and by the way, here's a link to a video you can watch online, or to an audio you can listen to online, or here's a DVD, or come over and watch the show, and listen to this person. And then you've got them like this, yes, you should know. Now you've got them like, oh my God, I need to know. The right to choose is really, for those of us who are educated, the need to reject. So what we have done at the Institute for Responsible Technology is we've taken the same information. Some of it's different because it's very new, but the same compelling level of information that changes people's diets that we gave you today, and we packaged it into books, DVDs, CDs, articles, blog posts, and PowerPoints, fully scripted. So you can be involved in this, very simply. I'm going to put out there a sign-up sheet for our newsletter. There's some books out there. That book, those collections, that's what we put together as the library for people to use this to get the information out. I want you to rate yourself from 1 to 100 how active you want to be at getting the word out on GMOs. How many people plan to be low active? 1 to 20, raise your hand. 20 to 40. 20 to 60. 60 to 80. 80 to 100. So, you'll notice the same information that changes behavior and diet makes the same information go viral. It's completely self-propelling, just like genetically engineered pollution, cross-pollination. This is non-GMO cross-pollination. It's very simple. It is not rocket science. It is very simple. We have the information. So those of you that can afford it, I encourage you deeply, especially in California right now, to get as many materials as you can. Put your name and address and phone number and email in it, and then send it around. And send it around. And write down the message and say, when can I get it back? I need to get it. Send it around. And get on our mailing list, our email list, so you can be a click and send revolutionary. How many people have a Facebook? How many people have an email address? How many people know anyone? Anyone? Right, we're all networked. And what do when we get the information out about GMOs? We give people what they want. The most common reaction I get when I give someone a non-GMO shopping guide is, thank you, can I have some more for my friends or my family? People want to know. Don't think that being a non-GMO activist means convincing that nephew who's a biotechnology major, or convincing someone who's pro-GM. We don't need them. In fact, we don't need, as I say, the couch potato junk-eating American who has never realized that GMOs are in their food, and will never realize that we got rid of it for them. We will do it with the movers and shakers. We will do it with a handful of people who will be so grateful that you've got this information to them and save them and future generations. People come up to me all the time and tell me that I have saved their lives. And I personally, I don't think I have saved their lives. I think just opening a channel to the truth, and the truth sets them free. So we have an opportunity to simply be a conduit for this information and get it out. And we can do this. So I want to end this by saying this. First of all, if you're from California, then please sign the petition today. I think there's some petitions out on the table. stay for the training, so you can sign up 10 or 100 or 1,000 of your closest personal friends. Pam Larry, who started this, who spoke at the earlier panel, she signed up 700 people in 3 days. And it's totally elated. It's a total joy. The professional fundraisers, the professional signature gatherers, they have all these things that people want them to sign. What do they start with? The GMO petition, because everyone wants to sign it. Or not everyone, almost everyone. And so, I would like to encourage you to join the fun and enjoy the opportunity of telling future generations and the plants and the animals and our gut bacteria that we did. Thank you very much.